Have you ever been to a play and wondered why the woman was being played by a young man? Probably not, because nowadays women could be played by men because that is the way it is now. Women acting in theater was a very important aspect at the time, but it's just one of the many things that changed during the time of the Royal Theatre. I'm going to inform you about the background behind the Royal Theatre and how it's impacted the course of the history of theater throughout history. I've completed research about this topic on text and online, including different versions of Robert Cohen's book, Theatre. Today I will cover what made the Royal Theatre important and unique, how the theatre's environment was set up and laid out, and some examples of famous playwrights and plays that they made throughout this era. I'd like to begin by discussing what separated this time from other theater eras. The Royal Theatre was right after the Renaissance and was during the time of the Enlightenment, which was a time of emerging sciences, philosophies, and showed the importance of European royalty. The plays were intended for the aristocrats, which are like the upper class. It was obviously for them rather than the general public, and the theater became a kind of clubhouse or a place to hang out for this aristocracy. So it was a place for them to get out, see other people, and obviously because they were rich and kind of stuck up, they wanted to get their face out there and let everybody know who they were. And these people were self-indulgent degenerates, if you will. They wanted to see themselves on stage being portrayed in any way possible, even if it was making fun of themselves. They didn't care, they just wanted to see what they were like up there. The main idea that was used during this time was rational sensibility. The playwrights needed to keep the audience's attention during this time, so they used neoclassicism, which is the study of older types of theaters, like from Aristotle. By following the guidelines and principles of rational order, it included the avoidance of stage violence and vigorous physical activities, but then the women came into role, and it was a big time during theater because obviously women weren't allowed to be part of plays back then, and it changed theater a lot because it wasn't the men and the women could impact theater in their own way. Now that I've discussed the background of the Royal Theatre, I'd like to talk a little bit about the theatre itself. The look of the theatres in the era were quite similar to those of the Renaissance, except most of the time during this time they were inside, so it changed the style of the play a lot. Indoor theatres changed the setting and mood of the theatre by, first of all, a lot of the outdoor theatres obviously use sunlight to light it up, but instead they use candles because it was indoors, which provided a lot more intimate and relaxed environment for this upper class, which they enjoyed a lot. The bad weather was kept outside, so there was no wind or rain or any precipitation going on, so they could have a lot more elaborate scenes instead of things blowing around or being destroyed by the rain. You could have a lot more elaborate scenes, which was a lot more enjoyable. The architecture of the stage and backgrounds changed how the play was performed. They had new things like the proscenium arch, which is a really obvious thing they have now, which is the big, you go to the theater, they have the curtains and they have the big arch around it, which kind of was new at the time, but it separated the stage performers and the audience. And they also created the apron stage, which is just the curved outside stage, which allowed them to move out a little further and look a little nicer. The first theaters during this era were originally tennis courts, which weren't very nice, but then they became really nice, huge theaters like the Dorset Garden and Drury Lane, there's two pictures of them there. There's more there, that's Drury Lane, that's Dorset Theatre, and that one shows kind of how the arch was and the apron. Now that I've discussed the theatre itself, I would now like to talk to you about some of the playwrights and the plays that they did during this time. There are a couple of playwrights during this era that were well known and that had a combination of characteristics that made these performances unique. One of the most famous writers during this time was Molière, and he performed for King Louis XIV in France. He was an actor, critic, producer, and performer during his time, which was really impressive. His comedies talk about the quirks of the age and human conflicts that were very excellent insight and wit. He had a play called The Bourgeoisie Gentleman as an example of social satire that pleased both the public court and it had wit, romance, and social commentary. And I'm going to play a clip here from that play.
Traitor! Judas!
Our last encounter must have upset you.
Oh, honor among thieves. Your feelings were hurt.
Brilliant deduction.
Isn't that the problem?
Yes, Phyllis, and I'm here to tell you. I won't give you the satisfaction of dropping me, I'll drop you first. True, it will be hard for me to overcome the profound all-entering love I have for you. It will break my heart, in fact, I'll die, but I'll get over it. And I'd rather wrench out my own kidneys and take you back. What he said. I don't want to hear.
Oh, that happenstance encounter this morning.
Don't speak.
It was just...
Social now.
Listen.
Quiet. What?
I'm trying to tell you.
You're no evil.
Oh, no, really.
My dad.
Like,
No.
oh, yellow.
Absolutely not.
Stop this.
Who?
Listen to me.
Tish.
Just a moment.
No.
Hear me out.
Blah, blah, blah. Not Stephen.
One word.
Too many.
Very well. Since you won't listen, think what you like. Precisely. What she said.
As you can see from that, they were dressed in very nice clothing, and it kind of portrayed the kind of scene that you'd be seeing back then. The romance and feeling allowed for intellect and sophisticated plays about gossip, intrigue, sexual opportunities, yet it had a strong sense of dignity. There are also some other playwrights like Pedro Calderón, who is known for his dramas for King Philip IV in Spain, and Jean Racine, who is known for his tragedies in France. The poet John Dryden tried combining the qualities of both Racine and Shakespeare. It was a form of rhymed heroic tragedy, but it was not very successful at the time. And shortly after this, this form of theater, which was only for the upper class, did not go very far because it was targeting a small portion of the population, and it just went out of that era because a lot of the population was not watching that theater, so a new theater came into play. Now I'd like to close with the following statements. I specifically looked at the background of the Royal Theatre, the design of the theatres, the important playwrights and plays of the time, and I hope I successfully informed you about the history of the Royal Theatre, how it has impacted the course of history on this subject. Overall, the Royal Theatre has allowed women to perform in plays. The design of indoor theatres has changed the aspects of this time a lot, and the ways that dramas, tragedies, and comedies were written and performed is much more similar to what we know today.